Hey guys, it's Mancub History here. Now, today I am back with an amazing episode about a really interesting topic. So let's start it off. So, famous for its cars, beer, and sausages, Germany has one of the greatest and most advanced human rights systems in the world right now. This is very different to what the nation was like 75 years ago, considering that its government kind of killed and tortured millions just based on their religion. Now, I'm sure most of you guys are familiar to that war I'm talking about, that Second World War, the one where like 60 million or so people were killed. But that's not the topic of today. We'll leave that for another time. Today I'm going to be talking about Germany, specifically before and after the Great War. The war to end all wars, which didn't really happen, but World War One. Now, I'm going to be talking about what drove Germany into joining the war, being part of it, and the aftermath, which, spoiler alert, Germany doesn't win. Now, let's get right into it. So, let's start before the war. Germany, not even half a century old before 1914. It had been, prior to 1871, it was just a cluster of like 25 German-speaking city-states or whatever, and they were all sandwiched between France, Russia, and the North Sea coast. So the reason they all kind of wanted to unify was inspired by the French Revolution, which occurred around the 1800s, the beginning of it, the end of the 1700s, and that was the rise of nationalism. The sense of nationalism in German-speaking people rose, and slowly people were like, you know what? I speak German, you speak German, we live relatively close. Why don't we unite and make a German nation? That just makes us all stronger. So that happened, and slowly Germany began uniting. And this began with the turmoil of 1848, when a series of revolutions swept through Eastern Europe. Now, these movements happened in Prussia, Bavaria, Baden, and Saxony. Sorry if I'm butchering the pronunciation. And all of them demanded change and political transformation. One of those was the creation of a German nation, or the unification of Germany. So the nationalist movement grew throughout the 1800s, and it was aided by political pamphleteers and populist journalists. The biggest flashpoint, or the biggest high point for German nationalism, was the brief but glorious and successful Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 71. After that war, peace negotiations began, and they were held at Versailles. Their German delegates, guided by the brilliant Prussian statesman Otto von Bismarck, negotiated and created the long-awaited unification of Germany. Now, this kind of birthed the so-called Second Reich under its new Kaiser, Wilhelm I. Now, the Kaiser was the head of state with the chancellor, and they were basically the head of government. The population at the time, right before World War One, was around 68 million people. That was in 1913, which is more than present-day France or Great Britain. So Germany's main economy, or its main income, came from coal, iron, cotton cloth, steel, electrical products, the chemical industry, and motor construction. So the first three, so coal, iron, cotton cloth, and steel, they were kind of the main heavy industries. They were kind of the industries that the German people, or the Prussian people, or the newly formed German nation was kind of reliant on for quite some time. Now, the new industries that came up, especially towards the end of the 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s, were electrical products, and they were one of the first nations that participated in the motor industry and the motor construction. As I have already said, they also started becoming prominent in the chemical industry. This comes in really into World War One, and you can really see they used mustard gas, a really poisonous gas. Now, towns and cities really changed after Germany was unified. So, in 1871, right when before Germany was created as one united nation, only 8 towns or cities had over 100,000 people living in them in Germany. Now, in 1910, however, 48 towns or cities had more than 100,000 people living in them. In fact, 60% of the German population lived in a town or city by 1910. This shows the shift of people leaving traditional roles, traditional jobs, and moving towards the cities to pursue newer industries and newer jobs and stuff that was still coming up. For example, creating weapons, creating motors, creating all of these things that led Germany into World War One and kind of made the German government want to test its new technologies, want to test its new weaponry. Now let's start talking more about the war and the army. So the army that entered World War One was consisted of about 3,822,450 men, the second largest army in the world at that time, only outnumbered by the Russians. So throughout the war, Kaiser II, so Kaiser Wilhelm II was the official commander-in-chief, but the army chief of staff, Helmuth von Moltke, was the actual or effective leader in the field. So the German army in 1914 comprised of 25 corps, so around 700,000 men, and within a week of the war being declared, the reserves called up for around 3.8 million Germans to come and fight for the war. And that just shows that in the beginning of the war, the Germans especially expected the war to be quick and swift, especially with the new technologies that were coming up in the time, because this was the first time that tanks were being used, machine guns were being used, and all these motorized equipments and technological advances allowed for the war to be not just bigger but also deadlier. So the German army especially and the German government especially thought that the war was going to be quick and swift, and that's why at first they just put out 700,000 men to go to war, but then ended up within a week they calling up around 3.8 million men from the reserves. And many factors pushed Germany into World War One. So rise of nationalism. So nationalism had been growing since like the French Revolution, and lots of nations and like the people of the nations were kind of like standing up for themselves and throwing over their governments and either splitting apart or coming together, and that's what created Germany. So the rise of nationalism was kind of one of the key factors that pushed Germany into World War One and it wanting to prove itself. Now, Industrial Revolution, another great factor, and the Industrial Revolution, especially with Germany, was that it was kind of, and you could even see till now, Germany is one of the key countries when it comes to motorized products, so such as cars, and that kind of started before World War One, and Germany wanted to kind of use these new technologies that they were coming up with, and the new technologies that they were creating, such as tanks and the new bombs and weaponry that they were creating. They wanted to like see what these weapons can do. Now, another really important factor that kind of pushed them into the war was the German Empire looking at all the other empires, like such as the British Empire, which the sun never sets on, and that infuriated the German Empire and the German government, because the French and the British and even the Italians seem to have claimed either Africa or Asian nations and kind of cut them up and divided them between each other, while the Germans didn't take anything. So the Germans saw this and wanted to expand, wanted more power. Now, to understand why Germany entered World War One, you need to understand why World War One happened. And there was one major incident, one major cause that kind of triggered World War One. And before we get to that cause, you need to look back at the alliances that were created before World War One. So you had the Triple Alliance, so Germany, Austria, Hungary, they were both kind of like one country, and Italy. Those were the Triple Alliance. Now you had the Triple Entente, Great Britain, France, and Russia. Those were the Triple Entente, or like the Allies, especially in World War Two. So also keep in mind that Russia is really close to Serbia. It's really tight with Serbia. So if you mess with Serbia, you mess with Russia. So what happened was there was an assassination that occurred, and this assassination was who was assassinated was the Austrian Duke and heir to the throne, Franz Ferdinand, and he was assassinated by Gavrilo Princip, a Serbian nationalist. So now it's a Serbian going against an Austrian. So what does that do? It makes Austria and Hungary go and fight against Serbia. So when you fight against Serbia, you get Russia. So when Russia went into the war, who also went into the war? Germany. They were like, you know what? We're gonna also help Austria and Hungary in this war. After Germany enters, Italy also enters, and then France is dragged into it, and so is Great Britain. So now you've got a whole war in Europe. Like the great powers of Europe fighting against each other. Now, by the end of the war, at November 1918, Germany had lost around 1.7 million people. So that was around 1.7 to 1.75 million people dead and 5 million casualties. So that includes like the injured and all that. And this was a huge loss to Germany. And not just that, but Germany and the Triple Alliance was now the losing side of the war. And Germany kind of took all the blame for the war, since it was the main antagonist against all the other allied forces, the Triple Entente. So because of that, it had the biggest consequences, or it had kind of the biggest punishments. And these punishments were kind of given to Germany by the Treaty of Versailles. So now, because of the Treaty of Versailles, the German armaments were strictly limited, and you could only have a maximum of 100,000 troops and no conscription. So no tanks, armored cars, or military aircrafts, and they could only have 6 battleships. The Treaty of Versailles also caused lots of economic tribulations that the Germans had to overcome. So it started, or one of them was in 1921, when Germany received a bill for around 6.6 billion pounds. 6.6 billion pounds back in the day, for compensations for the damages that they had done during First World War. So Germany had to pay and try to keep up with the payments until December 1922, when it announced, nope, we are broke, we cannot do this anymore. So due to that, Belgium and France sent thousands of troops to seize control of coal mines, factories, and the railways, which were located mostly in the Ruhr. So what did the German government decide to do? It told its workers to go on strike and not follow the troops' commands. So this made the German unemployment rate go from 2% to 23%. Now, since the government now had a whole lot of people not working and not making any money, and so much debt on its hands, it decided to keep printing money. So because of it printing so much money, that made the actual money, the actual currency, the German mark, slowly not have any value. This was called hyperinflation. And by 1923, the German mark had almost no value. So this could be seen. So in November 1918, it cost 1 mark to buy a loaf of bread. In November 1922, it cost 163 marks. In September 1923, it cost 1,500,000 marks. And by November 1923, still the same year, just 2 months apart, it cost around 200 billion marks to buy a loaf of bread. 200 billion. Can you believe it? American banks stepped in, and 1924 began giving loans from 1924 to 1929. But in 1929, something happened to those American banks. The Wall Street crash happened, and the solution for these banks was, okay, give us back our money now. And Germany had only 90 days to begin repayments, but of course, they couldn't. They were still trying to climb up again, still trying to fix themselves. And because Germany couldn't pay, lots of businesses failed and mass unemployment started, and up to or even more than 6 million people were unemployed. And this went on through to 1933. Now, many would think, like many other great empires or many other great nations or kingdoms, this was the fall of Germany. Well, not so much, and not really for the best of reasons in the same way. So, the most affected by the economical crisis were the people, and the people are always the most affected by whatever the government does or whatever happens in their nation, the citizens. So, there was a man that was rising through the ranks, really using these fears, these struggles that people faced to his advantage to kind of promote himself and advertise himself as the savior, kind of the person that's gonna help them through these struggles and take them to a better place. And this person was Adolf Hitler. And because of him, he kind of took Germany from 1933 to 1939, kind of started building Germany back up, showing Germany as an international power again. And he actually went against the Treaty of Versailles by rebuilding the army. Hitler then in 1936 hosted the Olympics in Germany, the first televised Olympics ever. And not only is this a great feat for a country that was in economic crisis, but it also shows the world and shows the German people, you know what, we're back in it, we're back as the leading countries in the world. And Hitler also funded many German companies. One of the most famous ones is Volkswagen. So now, from 1933 to 1939, Hitler took Germany from a country with more than 6 million people unemployed to a country that's about to enter war to dominate all of Europe. So that's such a drastic change. And since we're talking about Hitler, one of the greatest ultra-nationalists of all time, let's talk about nationalism. So nationalism is a sense of pride, and pride usually takes people south more than north. So when you think about nationalism, you think about people fighting for their country, for people standing up for their nation. But when you look at Germany in World War I, nationalism took their soldiers into a war that in the end they lost, and it cost their country great and really almost broke the country apart. So is nationalism actually good? Is it something that we should be proud of? These are all questions you could answer in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. Now, smash that subscribe button, and I hope you love this Man Cub history video. If you want more Man Cub history videos, just comment down in the comment section below. We want more Man Cub history videos. I love you guys. Please have a great day, and just peace out, and don't repeat bad history again. Woo!